In a remote corner of the American Southwest, a pair of bobcats, Buck and Sage, had long roamed freely through rugged hills and dry plains. Their lives took a harrowing turn when Sage's labor stretched into a second day, leaving her and her unborn kitten hanging in the balance. They found an oasis at Red Mesa Wildlife Preserve, a place where flowing water promised survival. Two staff members at the preserve, Mike and Rachel, soon noticed signs of the new arrivals. The humans, watching from afar, knew the rule: never interfere. But as Sage's strength failed with each passing hour, the rangers faced an impossible choice. What if the rule was wrong? What if the only way to save her was to break it? What followed would test the limits of trust between man and wild, leading to a moment so breathtaking and deeply moving it would become legend. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The dust of the high desert was a constant companion, a fine, reddish powder that settled on everything, including hope. For Buck and Sage, a pair of bobcats bound by a partnership as old as the rugged hills they called home, the dust was a harbinger of famine. The sun, a merciless sovereign in the cloudless sky, had baked the American Southwest for too many seasons. The creeks had shriveled into cracked, sun-bleached arteries, and the hardy junipers and piñon pines stood brittle and thirsty. Buck, a magnificent male in his prime, felt the gnawing emptiness in his belly with a primal urgency. His tawny coat, a masterpiece of spotted camouflage, was stretched taut over a frame that had grown leaner with each passing week. The cottontails had vanished, the ground squirrels had burrowed deep and stayed there, and even the wily jackrabbits, once abundant, were now fleeting ghosts in the twilight. His world, once a kingdom of plenty, had become a barren wasteland. Beside him, Sage trod with a weariness that went beyond hunger. She was smaller than Buck, her movements imbued with a fluid grace that was now hampered by a deep-seated fatigue. Her survival, and the survival of the life she carried within her, depended on him. She would often look at him with her wide, intelligent eyes, a gaze that conveyed not accusation, but a profound and unwavering trust that both fortified and terrified him. He was her provider, her protector, and he was failing. The decision to leave was not a conscious one, but a primal surrender to the oldest law of the wild: move or die. Their territory, a sprawling expanse of canyons and mesas that had sustained their ancestors for generations, could no longer support them. One evening, as the setting sun painted the horizon in hues of blood and fire, Buck nuzzled Sage's neck, a silent promise exchanged between them. They turned their backs on the familiar scent of home and began a journey into the unknown, a desperate pilgrimage guided by instinct and the faint, whispered rumors of water that traveled on the wind. Their trek was an odyssey of hardship. They navigated the treacherous black rivers of asphalt where roaring metal beasts thundered past, their light slicing through the darkness. They skirted the edges of human settlements, the alien smells of wood smoke and livestock a constant, menacing reminder of a world they did not belong to. They were phantoms in the landscape, moving under the cloak of night, their paws silent on the unforgiving ground. The journey stretched for what felt like an eternity, a grueling test of endurance that pushed them to the very brink. Sage grew weaker, her steps more deliberate, and Buck's vigilance intensified, his senses on a razor's edge, guarding her against the myriad dangers of their nomadic existence. After weeks of relentless travel, a change came upon the air. It was subtle at first, a faint hint of moisture, a whisper of green in the dusty breeze. The scent grew stronger, drawing them onward like a siren's call. They topped a final weary rise, and before them lay a sight so miraculous it seemed a desert mirage. A vast valley unfolded, cradled by crimson mesas. Unlike the desiccated land behind them, this place was vibrant with life. A ribbon of water, a real flowing creek, snaked through a meadow of green grasses and cottonwood trees, their leaves shimmering like silver coins in the afternoon sun. They had found it. They had found Red Mesa Wildlife Preserve. Mike Callahan felt the familiar rhythm of the preserve in his bones. At 58, his face was a roadmap of his years spent under the sun and sky, etched with the fine lines of a man who smiled often and worried deeply. He'd been the senior ranger at Red Mesa for the better part of 3 decades, and his connection to the land was less a job and more a calling. He knew the subtle language of the wilderness, the meaning of a hawk's cry, the story told by a track in the mud, the promise held in the shape of a cloud. He steered his battered but reliable pickup truck along the winding dirt road that bisected the preserve, his gaze sweeping across the landscape. Beside him, Dr. Rachel Bennett, the preserve's wildlife biologist and veterinarian, was peering through a pair of binoculars. She was 15 years his junior, with a sharp intellect and a compassionate heart that made her a perfect counterpoint to his quiet intuition. "Anything?" Mike asked, his voice a low rumble. "Just the usual suspects," Rachel replied, not lowering the binoculars. "Our resident golden eagle is putting on a show, and the mule deer are looking particularly plump this season." It was Rachel who first saw the signs. A week after Buck and Sage had arrived, she was examining the silt bank along Willow Creek when she froze. "Mike, come look at this." Mike ambled over, his boots making soft imprints in the damp earth. He knelt beside her, his experienced eyes immediately recognizing the significance of the tracks. They were bobcat prints, but they were different from those of the 2 resident males they had tracked for years. These were larger, the stride longer, and there were 2 sets, traveling close together. "Newcomers," Mike stated, a note of intrigue in his voice. "Big ones, and traveling as a pair. That's not something you see every day." Thus began a period of patient, almost reverent observation. Mike and Rachel became quiet disciples of the new arrivals, using their extensive knowledge to track the elusive felines without disturbing them. They set up motion-activated trail cameras in strategic locations, and the images they captured were breathtaking. The cameras revealed a male of imposing size and fierce beauty, and a female whose graceful presence was undeniable. They moved with the confidence of royalty, reclaiming a lost throne. "He's magnificent," Rachel murmured one afternoon as they reviewed the footage on her laptop in the small, cluttered office that served as the preserve's headquarters. The video showed Buck standing guard while Sage drank from the creek, his head constantly swiveling, his ears twitching at every sound. "He's devoted," Mike corrected gently. "Look how he never lets her out of his sight." As the weeks turned into a month, then 2, a new and delicate truth began to unfold. Rachel was the first to voice it. "Mike, look at the way she's moving," she said, pointing to a new set of images. "Her gait is different, slower, and her abdomen. Does it look fuller to you?" Mike leaned closer, studying the still frames. Sage's belly, once sleek and athletic, now possessed a subtle, rounded curve. He thought of Buck's behavior, his protectiveness escalating from mere vigilance to an almost frantic devotion. It all clicked into place. "I'll be damned," he whispered, a slow smile spreading across his face. "She's pregnant." The news sent a wave of quiet excitement through the small team at the preserve. The arrival of new life was always a gift, but this felt different. These were not just any bobcats. They were survivors, refugees who had journeyed hundreds of miles in search of a sanctuary to raise their young. Their story was already one of incredible resilience, and the impending birth felt like the triumphant final chapter. Mike and Rachel watched with a blend of scientific curiosity and personal investment as Sage began preparing a den. She chose a secluded spot, a small, protected cave nestled within a rocky outcrop on the western slope of the mesa overlooking the valley. It was a perfect fortress, defensible and sheltered. They observed her painstakingly lining the den with dry grasses and shed fur, while Buck patrolled the perimeter relentlessly, a silent sentinel ensuring his family's absolute safety. They had found their home. They had found their peace. Or so it seemed. The first signs of labor began on a cool spring morning. A change in the air, a tension that even the birds seemed to respect with their silence. From their distant observation post, a small camouflaged blind on an opposing ridge, Mike and Rachel watched through a powerful spotting scope. They saw Sage retreat into the den, her movements heavy and purposeful. Buck took up his position at the entrance, a statue of taut muscle and unwavering focus. Excitement hummed between the two humans. "Any time now," Rachel said, her voice filled with anticipation. But the hours bled into one another with no result. The sun climbed to its zenith, then began its slow descent. And still, there was no sign of a kitten. The only evidence of the drama unfolding within the cave was Buck's ever-increasing agitation. He would pace in tight circles, peer into the darkness of the den, and occasionally let out a low, guttural sound that was not quite a growl, but a sound of deep and anxious concern. By the time night fell, a cold knot of worry had replaced the earlier excitement in Mike's stomach. "This is taking too long," he said, his voice tight. "It can happen," Rachel reasoned, though her own brow was furrowed with concern. "First-time mothers sometimes. It's a difficult process." They took shifts through the night, one sleeping fitfully in the back of the truck while the other kept a lonely vigil. The second day dawned, gray and somber, mirroring their mood. The situation had grown dire. Through the scope, they could now see Sage at the mouth of the den, her body racked with tremors. Her breathing was shallow and ragged. She was exhausted, her strength failing. She had been in labor for nearly 48 hours. "She's in trouble, Mike," Rachel said, her professional calm beginning to crack. "Serious trouble. It's likely uterine inertia. Her muscles are too exhausted to contract anymore. She can't deliver on her own." The reality of the situation crashed down upon them. They were witnessing a tragedy in slow motion. Nature, in all its unforgiving cruelty, was taking its course. "What can we do?" Mike asked, though he already knew the answer was likely nothing. The standard procedure would be a shot of oxytocin to stimulate contractions, maybe some fluids for dehydration, Rachel explained, her mind racing through the veterinary textbook. But to do that, we'd have to get to her. We'd have to tranquilize her, and tranquilizing a wild animal in this late stage of pregnancy under this much stress, it could kill her and the kittens both. And that's if we could even get past Buck. They stared at the scene across the valley, at the devoted male standing guard over his dying mate, and felt a profound sense of helplessness. The protocol was clear. Observe. Do not interfere. They were custodians of the wild, not its masters. But looking at Sage, whose epic journey had brought her to this place of sanctuary only to face death, the protocol felt like a cold and hollow excuse for inaction. "We can't just sit here and watch her die," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. He thought of the Bobcats' incredible journey, their courage, their resilience. It couldn't end like this. It just couldn't. Rachel was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the suffering animal. She was a scientist, trained to be objective, but she was also a healer. There's one other option," she said slowly, reluctantly. "It's a huge risk, probably a stupid one." Mike turned to her. "What is it?" "We could try to approach. No tranquilizer, just walk up there. See if we can get close enough for me to administer the injection. It's a long shot. He'll see us as a threat. He could attack. He should attack." It was an insane idea. Approaching a healthy, protective male bobcat was dangerous enough. Approaching one whose mate was in distress was suicidal. But as they looked at each other, they saw the same desperate resolve reflected in their eyes. The rules were written for a reason, but sometimes you had to write a new one. "Get your kit," Mike said, his decision made. "Let's go." The walk from the truck to the base of the mesa was the longest of Mike's life. Every crunch of their boots on the gravel sounded like a cannon shot in the preternatural silence of the valley. The air was heavy with an almost unbearable tension. They carried no weapons, only Rachel's medical kit and a shared, unspoken prayer. Mike's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the quiet hum of the wilderness. He had spent his life earning the trust of this land, and he was about to put that trust to the ultimate test. As they began their slow ascent up the rocky slope, Buck saw them. He had been facing the den, but his head snapped around, his body instantly coiling like a spring. A low, menacing growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound that vibrated through the very rocks beneath their feet. It was a clear, unambiguous warning. This far and no further. They froze. Rachel's hand tightened on the handle of her kit. Mike slowly raised his hands, palms open, a universal gesture of peace he knew the animal wouldn't understand, but it calmed his own racing nerves. He kept his eyes on Buck, not with a challenging stare, but with a soft, steady gaze. He had been a non-threatening presence in this bobcat's life for months. He had never made a sudden move, never betrayed his position. He was just the man in the rumbling truck, a familiar shape on the horizon. "Easy, boy," Mike said, his voice barely a whisper, carried on the breeze. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help her. We're here to help Sage." He took another slow, deliberate step. The growl intensified, the fur along Buck's spine bristling. His lips curled back to reveal a formidable set of teeth. He was a cornered animal, torn between his instinct to defend his mate and den and some other inexplicable feeling. He could see the humans clearly. They were slow, they were calm, and their scent carried no aggression, only a strange mix of fear and resolve. He remembered them. He remembered the quiet vehicle that never strayed from the road, the figures who watched from a great distance. They had never been a threat. Mike took another step, then another. He was talking the whole time, a steady, soothing monologue. He spoke of the preserve, of the creek, of the fine den they had chosen. He spoke Sage's name over and over, a soft, respectful invocation. And then, the unbelievable happened. Buck did not retreat, but he did not charge. He held his ground, his growl subsiding into a low, anxious rumble. He shifted his weight, glancing back toward the cave entrance where Sage lay, and then back at the approaching humans. It was a moment of profound, terrifying indecision. And in that moment, he made a choice. He chose trust. He stepped aside, a barely perceptible movement, clearing the path to the den. He remained standing, a tense, silent guardian. But he let them pass. Rachel felt a wave of adrenaline and awe wash over her. She moved past Mike, her focus narrowing to the task at hand. She knelt beside Sage. The Bobcat was barely conscious, her beautiful coat matted with sweat and dirt. Her eyes were glazed with pain, but as Rachel gently touched her shoulder, they flickered with a spark of awareness. "It's okay, girl," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "We're going to help you." Her movements were swift and sure. She drew a small dose of oxytocin into a syringe. Mike stood watch, his body positioned between Rachel and the open valley, his eyes never leaving Buck. The male Bobcat watched every move, a silent, nerve-wracking spectator to this strange and intimate procedure. Rachel found a vein, her touch gentle and practiced, and administered the injection. Then they waited. The silence was absolute, broken only by Sage's shallow breathing and the distant cry of a red-tailed hawk. Minutes stretched into an hour. Rachel monitored Sage's vitals, occasionally stroking her head and murmuring words of encouragement. Mike remained a statue, and Buck paced, a restless, golden-furred ghost at the edge of the clearing, his trust hanging by a fragile thread. The change, when it came, was dramatic. Sage stirred, a deep shudder running through her body. She lifted her head, and a low moan escaped her throat. A powerful contraction seized her, and she gave a desperate, instinctive push. Rachel and Mike held their breath, their hearts in their throats. Another push, stronger this time. And then, with a final shuddering effort, a tiny, wet, and utterly perfect creature slid into the world. The spell was broken. The tension that had held the mesa captive for 2 days evaporated in an instant. Sage, fueled by a last reserve of maternal strength, immediately began to lick her newborn, her rough tongue cleaning and stimulating the tiny body. The kitten, no bigger than a man's hand, let out a faint, mewling cry. It was the most beautiful sound Mike had ever heard. Buck crept forward, all his earlier menace gone, replaced by a look of pure wonder. He nudged Sage's head with his own, a tender and intimate gesture. He then lowered his nose to the kitten, sniffing this miraculous new life that was part of him. Sage, weak but radiant, gazed at her baby, her wide, glowing eyes filled with an expression of fierce and absolute love. Tears streamed freely down Mike's weathered cheeks. Beside him, Rachel was also crying, silent tears of relief, exhaustion, and overwhelming emotion. They had been privileged witnesses to a miracle, not just the miracle of birth, but the miracle of trust between two worlds that so rarely met in peace. They backed away slowly, quietly, their movements respectful and unobtrusive. They left the new family to bond in the privacy of their hard-won sanctuary. As they reached the bottom of the slope, Mike turned for one last look. Buck was standing at the entrance to the den, looking not at his mate, but at them. And in his gaze, there was no threat, no fear. There was only a calm, steady acknowledgement. Back at the office, as the adrenaline faded, they gave the Bobcats their names. Sage, for her incredible resilience and the quiet wisdom she seemed to possess. Buck, for his steadfast strength and the courage it took to trust. And the kitten, they named Aspen, a tree known for its resilience, for its interconnected roots, for its ability to regenerate and bring new life to a landscape. It was a name that symbolized hope and a deep rootedness in the wild soil of Red Mesa. From that day forward, something fundamental had shifted between the humans of the preserve and the Bobcat family. The established ritual of observation took on a new character. Whenever Mike's truck rumbled down the dirt road, the Bobcats would no longer melt into the scenery. Instead, Sage and Buck would pause what they were doing, and little Aspen, growing stronger and more curious each day, would mimic his parents. They would stand and watch the vehicle pass, their gazes calm and knowing. It was not the tameness of a pet, but the earned respect between sovereigns of different domains. Aspen thrived under the patient tutelage of his parents. Mike and Rachel would often watch from a distance as he learned the essential lessons of being a bobcat. They saw Buck teaching him how to stalk through the tall grass, how to read the wind, and how to execute the perfect pouncing leap. They saw Sage showing him which berries were safe to eat and how to listen for the rustle of a vole beneath the leaves. He was a testament to his parents' strength and a living symbol of the day the line between man and wild had blurred. The story of the intervention became a quiet legend at Red Mesa, a tale Mike would tell to new rangers and visiting researchers, not as a story of human heroism, but as a lesson in humility and respect. It was a reminder that the most profound connections are often forged not through dominance, but through a willingness to be vulnerable, to offer help without demanding anything in return. Years passed. Mike's hair turned from gray to a distinguished white, and his steps became a little slower. Rachel eventually moved on to a larger research facility, though she and Mike spoke often, forever bonded by the memory of that day. Aspen grew into a magnificent adult, a mirror image of his father, and eventually left to find his own territory, carrying the legacy of his parents' resilience in his blood. One late autumn evening, Mike stood on the porch of his small cabin, looking out as the setting sun bathed the mesas in a warm, golden light. In the distance, on the very ridge where their den had been, he saw two familiar silhouettes. It was Buck and Sage. Their coats now tinged with the silver of age, but their bond as strong as ever. As if sensing his gaze, they both turned their heads and looked across the valley in his direction. They held the gaze for a long moment. There were no words, no grand gestures. There was only the vast, quiet space between them, filled with a shared history. A soft breeze swept up from the valley floor, rustling the cottonwood leaves, and to Mike, it felt as if the wind itself was carrying a message. It felt like they were still saying thank you.